Welcome to Giant-Sized Violence, an UltraMega podcast. I'm your host, Grant, and joining me today is a guest I'm very excited about. You've met other Grant, you've met Nate, and now joining us from the Henshin Men Podcast is other Nate. Welcome to the show, man.
Hello! Oh, wait, wrong show. Wrong show. Wrong show. I run several podcasts, so I have to switch to different gears in my head. Yeah, so it's like, no, wait, this is a Henshin Men crossover, not a Film Vault or Power Trip crossover. Okay. Center.
No worries. Now, you want to tell us a little bit about your podcast and the Henshin Men to fill our listeners in on what you do?
Yes, I am Nathan Marchand, the co-host of Henshin Men, a podcast about the appreciation of Japanese superheroes and their high-flying and high-kicking adventures. And my wonderful co-host is Travis Alexander, who is also the co-creator of the Kaiju Ramen magazine and the co-host of Kaiju Weekly, another podcast. So he asked me to join on that because we were both kaiju podcasters. He wanted to do a spinoff about Henshin heroes. So after a little bit of planning and all of that, we put some stuff together. We launched that little show. And then his co-host on Kaiju Weekly, Michael Hamilton, asked me to join him on another Henshin Hero podcast, The Power Trip, which I also mentioned, which is about Power Rangers. And so we're going through Power Rangers one season at a time on that one. Henshin Men is focused primarily on stuff like what you're talking about here, like your supplementary episodes, which is actually how we ended up finding out about each other, kind of funny enough. But I'll get to that in a second. So we're Henshin Men is a television podcast primarily. So we're going through currently, we launched last July, and we're going through the original Kamen Rider from 1971, a couple episodes at a time. Travis is the biggest Kamen Rider fan I know. He loves it to death. So he wanted to start this show to get people interested in Kamen Rider. So we started at the beginning with the original, where we just got to the halfway point, which is crazy because Kamen Rider, the original, is 98 episodes.
Yeah, I was just about to say, like, that's nothing to shake a stick at. Like, that's at least 40 to even hit the halfway.
Yeah, that's for sure. But there have been some points where Travis has needed some time off for personal reasons. A lot of stuff's been going on in his family, but I did not want our listeners to go without episodes, so I've been doing some, I just guess you could say, to use the anime term, I've been doing filler episodes just about different Henshin heroes because I would have felt bad if I covered Kamen Rider without Travis, because his little Kamen Rider love and heart would have just broken if I had done that. So I've brought some other people on. I've talked about some Ultraman Zero specials. I even did an episode on a Super Sentai anime parody called Shinesman. But the reason I am here representing the show, Travis was supposed to join us, but he is hurriedly getting the finishing touches to issue 5 of Kaiju Ramen magazine put together to have out next month, which is really exciting. I've got an article in there actually that relates to some of what you've been talking about a little bit because it's about Keita and Memiya. Issue 5 is going to be themed around tokusatsu and Henshin heroes, so might want to check that out.
Yeah, and I actually want to touch on that really quick because since discovering your podcast, listening to a few episodes, I've now discovered this Keita Memiya figure. And for the listeners at home, turns out everything I have absolutely loved in tokusatsu so far, with Mechanical Violator Hakaider, Kamen Rider Black, the Kamen Rider Zeo movie, this guy is involved in all of those. So almost everything I love about Toku, I can tie back to one guy.
Yep. I bet you'll enjoy my article about him. You can learn about even more stuff that he's worked on. You'll probably find a slew of more things to start watching.
Yeah, I'll probably find a few bonus episodes for the future reading this.
Mm-hmm. He's also worked on video games, just so you know. He did character designs for, I think it was Onimusha? Or at least Onimusha 3, I think. He also, you remember an N64 game called, oops.
Zordon?
Yeah, Zordon's calling. I'm in the Power Ranger reserves. My cover has been blown. But speak of the devil, that is Michael Hamilton trying to text me right now. So, yeah, like as I was saying, he's done a lot of stuff, and so you'll probably find plenty to start checking out. But speaking of Memiya and Hakaider, That's how we found out about each other. You want to talk about accidental synergy, my friend. We both put out episodes on Hokkaido on the same day.
Yeah, really serendipitous in general. Posted that, and I just wanted to see, I wonder if any other podcasts have covered Hokkaido. Typing into Spotify, and a little weird that with the thousands of bad movie podcasts there are out there, only maybe a dozen have ever talked about Hokkaido. And then, just the same exact day, this was me discovering your podcast. I never even heard of it before that.
That was one of those filler episodes. I had my friend Elijah Thomas, who is the host of the Kaiju Conversation podcast. He's been on hiatus for a while because he's a ridiculously busy, I would dare say overworked, but very ambitious high school. I'm trying to remember if he's a senior or junior. He's 17 going on 18, so I think he's a junior. And so he had to put his podcast on hiatus, and he wanted to do a collaboration with somebody. He just said on Twitter, I need to do a collaboration with somebody on something. And I said, hey, you want to come on Henshin Men? So he came on and we talked about Hokkaido. And then you messaged me. I forget. Did you tag us or did you message us? And
yeah, I tweeted at you on Twitter, and I was like, oh, hey, this is weird. And lucky enough for me, other Grant is also getting very involved with schoolwork right now, with grad school stuff, so he was too busy to come back to bookend the podcast covering issues 1 and 4 of the book. So yeah, now I got someone much more knowledgeable about Toku than I am to fill the role.
Also, you're not missing out on getting an academic perspective on this because your friend Grant is finishing grad school. I graduated with a master's just last year, so
impressive. Now we've got our introductions and opening preamble out of the way. Let's talk a little bit about UltraMega itself. So you, as someone who's much more knowledgeable about Ultraman than I am, especially going into this, I'm really curious about what you thought about the first 3 issues of UltraMega.
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up because I actually do remember seeing the first issue of UltraMega on the shelf at my local comic shop. And funny enough, it's similar to what you were talking about, where you said you were in there looking up the Marvel Ultraman comic. I was doing the same thing, and I was just looking through, and I was looking for the right spot on the shelf because this shop just arranges everything alphabetical, doesn't matter what company. And I came across, I said, UltraMega, what the heck is this? Image? Are they trying to rip off Ultraman? And I just kind of wrote it off. But then you're like, hey, I need someone to talk about issue 4. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm getting the comic. So I picked it up and read it, and I'm actually glad. Sometimes I will admit I'm a little too quick to write something off as a knockoff and just lose interest in seeing it. And I kind of wish I hadn't, although this is very much an Ultraman pastiche. It visually and in terms of its concepts. That's why I was really shocked that you mentioned that the creator of this book actually said he's not the biggest Toku fan. I'm like, yeah, could have fooled me.
Yeah, I'm really surprised with some of what seems like subtle Toku references here and there sprinkled through the book. I'm wondering how much of that is just accidental, or just how much that Ultraman and Kamen Rider imagery just kind of pervades culture. So if you just know a little bit about these characters' existence, it's going to influence you more than you think.
Now, speaking about the Ultraman influences, this in particular, because obviously this is much more adult-oriented than Ultraman, generally speaking, but there are actually, and I actually told you about this, there was actually an experiment that Tsuburaya did. It was in the early 2000s, I think around 2004, where they wanted to experiment to see, can we make Ultraman for grown-ups? So they wanted to give that a try, and they did what was called the Ultra N project, and it was a 3-pronged thing. One was a stage show, and I don't know anything about the stage show. I know nothing about this stage show. I haven't seen images or video or anything of it, but maybe I just haven't looked hard enough.
The one thing I know about that stage show from a Wikipedia search today is that the Ultraman in it is called Ultraman Noah. So yet another kind of weird connection to this.
Which is actually something that goes all the way back to the original Ultraman. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a bit of lore in the original Ultraman about Ultraman Noah. And
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And so they wanted to make Noah kind of the focus of this. And then the next stage of that little 3-prong project was a movie called Ultraman The Next. And I was telling you, it was like, out of all the Ultraman out there, both The Next and Nexus feel the most like UltraMega. Like, if I was going to pick Ultraman series, and I'm like, this is influencing UltraMega, it would be these. But so you have The Next, which I think you said it felt like a TV movie, and I can understand that, but I also feel like that compared to Japanese television at the time, it felt more cinematic. Maybe to Americans it feels like a TV movie, but I think it was definitely considered cinematic in Japan, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely liked it more than a lot of other more modern, or at least post-2000s Ultraman stuff I've seen. But yeah, like, just compared to American movies circa 2004, and I would say even Godzilla movies around the time, but it's been a long time since
2004, your Godzilla movie was Final Wars.
Okay, so yeah, maybe a hard one to compare to then.
Well, I don't care what anyone says. Final Wars is gloriously ridiculous, and I love every second of it.
And I mean, its CGI is a lot better, but I mean, if it's what the Godzilla franchise is going out on, I'm assuming there's a little more money and effort going into that than...
That's the interesting thing about the Next, is there is some CGI in it, but it's still primarily old school tokusatsu, practical effects. There's some CGI in it, but not as much as you would expect. And then there was the follow-up television series, which was called Nexus, Ultraman Nexus.
Yeah, and I actually checked out about an episode and a half of that today, and I can see what you're saying with the comparison. Like, well, no one's losing limbs or having their intestines fall out. Like,
yeah, because it's still operating on the Ultraman mythos, which is that these are beings of light. They're not biological.
But yeah, I mean, the Science Patrol at the end of the episode straight up killed a kid on accident, so...
yeah, it's dark.
Darkness here.
It is really dark, but that's the thing that makes the Next and Nexus interesting, is that when you say this is Ultraman for grown-ups, you think you're probably going to get something like an UltraMega, where it's super gory and it's got, you know, nudity and swearing and all of that. And that wasn't really the approach that Supro took with that. Their approach was, we're going to make the stories really dark, and we're going to make the themes very grown up. We're going to deal with really heavy things. Like the first Ultra host, spoiler warning, there's more than one. The first Ultra host for Nexus in the show is a war photographer dealing with PTSD. And that's something he wrestles with the entire time.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate them taking that route, because, I mean, I like how Kamen Rider Black feels like Kamen Rider or something like Power Rangers, treating the audience like an adult, but still feasibly made for kids.
The thing that was unfortunate is that The Next actually is considered, even though I think The Next is an excellent movie, it underperformed at the box office. And Nexus, I think because of its time slot, it was originally meant to air on what we would consider to be prime time, but it still ended up in that traditional Saturday morning slot for Ultraman. But this is not, it's not really meant for kids. So because of that, it floundered in the ratings, and it was supposed to run 50 episodes and it got cut short at 37. So like the last, I would say like 3 to 5 episodes are very rushed. Like the first 25 is gold. Like it's just absolute gold. And then the last 5 or so feel really rushed because they just crammed everything together. And they had like a whole other villain that they were going to bring in, but then they had to rush to just get it all done with because it just wasn't getting the ratings that it needed to have. And then after that, Supro went back to the drawing board and basically went back to what they had been doing and made Ultraman Max, which went back to more of the being more of a family show.
I guess I will adjust my expectations accordingly when I eventually get to my own Ultraman Nexus watch through.
You can watch fan subs on YouTube. It was on Crunchyroll for a while, along with a couple of other Ultra shows, but then it got pulled. I literally found out that it was getting pulled, and then I binged the whole thing in a week because that's all the time I had left. But Mill Creek is going to release it. And the story I hear is that they are going to release it on a set that will have the show and the movie together.
Now, as far as UltraMega so far goes, any other thoughts before we hop into issue 4?
As soon as I started reading it, it reminded me a lot of Hellboy. But then I looked at the artist and like, oh, he worked on BPRD. No wonder. So it's not Mike Mignola, but he's trying really hard to look like Mike Mignola because BPRD is a spinoff of Hellboy. It's like, well, that makes sense. And actually, I did actually describe this to some of my podcasting friends. I think Travis specifically, I said, it's Ultraman meets Hellboy.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect description, and two, like, I think the Mike Mignola art style is the perfect way to give that cartoony yet also hyper-violent look to a book. So yeah,
I would die, just die if they did something like a milestone episode, not episode, but issue of UltraMega, and they at least got Mignola to do a cover. Oh, I would lose my mind.
That's gotta happen eventually. I can't imagine that he doesn't at some point contribute.
Like, I don't know, comic book companies don't really do annuals anymore, but if they did like UltraMega annual #1 with a cover by Mike Mignola, I'd lose my mind.
Yeah, and I mean, they've done pretty good with their variant covers so far. Like issue 3, Ryan Otley, the artist from Invincible, did a variant cover for it. Had to get that because I love Invincible. Issue 4 had an awesome trans rights cover depicting the main UltraMega, but with the trans flag colors. I think it was even Pride Month that it came out, maybe. So yeah, definitely had to pick that one up as well. So yeah, they've got to get Mike Mignola eventually.
I should have expected this, but the level of violence did actually surprise me a bit. I wasn't exactly prepared for that, but I got used to it as time went on. And I also have noticed, and this is more just of an interpretation thing, but I tend to see the characters in this, although the ending of this issue, as we'll talk about, might change my mind a bit on that, but I've tended to see it as less gray compared to you guys. I do not sympathize with the kaiju in this all that much. I'm very much in favor of the UltraMegas, but I can see why I can see the imperfections that the UltraMegas have for sure.
To touch on that point specifically, and I think we'll flesh this out early on in our key points here, but I think it's less that I think the kaiju are good guys or all that sympathetic, but the more I find out about the conflict between the UltraMega and the kaiju, the more I see them as two sides of the same coin, and maybe the kaiju is a bit of kind of victims in all of this as well, or at least trying to make the most of the hand they've been dealt. And in some ways, actually, I'd say morally, there's a lot of things that makes me question how much worse than the UltraMega they actually are.
Yeah, well, I understand that, but it is definitely grayer by comparison to Ultraman, because in Ultraman, the Ultras, who hail from the land of light, and something you have to understand is that Eiji Tsuburaya, who created Ultraman, was actually a Japanese Catholic. He was raised Buddhist, converted to Catholicism, so I think if you pay attention, you'll notice that a lot, such as Showa Ultraman series' propensity to crucify the Ultras.
That's especially interesting with like all the biblical ties this has, at least with its naming conventions, so like that comes full circle.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think that influenced it a little bit, but they are from a distant planet. It is called Planet Ultra. Haha. And the Land of Lights I think it's supposed to be a region on there, and they are they're like the Green Lanterns. They are galactic peacekeepers. They're galactic defenders. They go around around the universe if there are monster problems or something like that, and they deal with those problems. So they're very much positioned to be the good guys. Now, there are points where they play around with whether or not the monsters are genuinely evil, but generally speaking, monsters are the bad guys.
Now, with our thoughts so far covered pretty well, mind if we move on into issue 4?
Go for it.
While at Death's Door, Noah is taken on a spirit journey by the Eye of Atom to meet Atom Supreme and become an UltraMega. However, the war with the kaiju has apparently not been going well for them. Their Supreme Eye has fallen, and with his dying breath, Atom Supreme gives our heroes his last transformation crystal before being devoured from the inside by kaiju maggots. Back on Earth, the kaiju prince begins his assault on the last human city using the mech Beth was forced to finish. While this is happening, Noah and the Eye of Adam finally bond to form a new UltraMega. However, this triggers the transformation of several nearby kaiju into their giant forms. Noah then has to face several monsters before his ultimate showdown with the kaiju prince. Though Noah comes out victorious, it may not have been worth the cost. Noah loses a hand in the process of killing the giant kaiju prince, and just as he and Beth finally reunite, the severed head of Noah's father crashes to Earth and ends the arc with the ominous question, "You didn't bond with it, did you?"
Ooh, dun dun dun.
Now, I love that ending so much. Just while it kind of comes quickly and almost out of nowhere in a certain regard, it really has made me excited for the next arc. And frankly, I am bummed that I don't know when issue 5 comes out, and it's been a good 6-7 months since issue 4.
Oh, really? It's been that long?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Well, given how Image runs, because I don't know how many people who are listening to this will know this, but Image is a little bit different compared to your DC and your Marvel. The big thing is that the comic book nerds who are listening to this know this, but for those who don't know, Image was actually started in the early 90s by a bunch of, I guess you could say, renegade creators who used to work for DC and Marvel, and they wanted to start their own company so that they could own their own stuff, because that is the impetus for Image, is that all the stuff they publish is creator-owned. They're just a publishing platform.
And going off the last letters column of issue 4, exactly what's happening here is that they're taking their time to fully flesh out and develop the next arc. So rather than trying to push and meet that monthly deadline, they can take as much time as they want to be ready.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the difference, is that they're not putting a bunch of mandated deadlines on these creators to crank stuff out. They're letting them take as much time as they want.
Now, looking at the book here, the story almost immediately starts off with us seeing the world of the UltraMega and learning more about how they work and operate, just kind of what's hinted at from the Eye of Adam. And I thought it was interesting that you compared Ultraman to the Green Lanterns earlier, because that's exactly what I was feeling looking at this when they're talking about, like, the Supreme Eye and Adam Supreme. It's very reminiscent of, like, the Green Lantern power battery or the Guardians of Oa.
But like I said, you'll see it even more in this. It's talked about in the previous issues, but you're really seeing this, like, this whole situation that you're seeing here. That continues even more of the Ultraman pastiche, because 99% of the time, or at least 90+% of the time, the way someone becomes an Ultraman is they have to basically die or almost die doing something incredibly heroic. So, for example, in the original Ultraman, Shin Hayata is actually, because of Ultraman, is about to have his plane crash, and then Ultraman says, to make up for that, I'm going to save you and bond with you so you'll live, but you'll become my vessel, basically.
I was going to say, in a more extreme example, you have, like, the Return of Ultraman, where our hero dies saving a child and a puppy from a kaiju battle. So they're really looking for the best of the best.
Yes. And that is very much an Ultraman tradition. Now, there's some exceptions to that, like Ultra 7 and Ultraman Leo are actually Ultras that just take human form. They don't have hosts. But generally speaking, that's how it works. And you're getting basically the same thing here. It's just that it's much more biological or visceral, I guess you could say, by comparison. It's a bit more spiritual, I guess you could say. Well, this is pretty spiritual too, but you know what I mean. There's much more of a physical component to it in this.
Actually, on that spirit aspect, I did want to point out something I thought was interesting in what they reveal about our main character here. Because it's something of like a spirit quest to the Ultra's homeworld, Noah takes his spirit form going there, and we see that instead of it being like his current self, it's a child in an UltraMega costume. And I think that really hints at a lot of how Noah sees himself and, like, his role in this world. And I just thought that was a really interesting, subtle world and character building detail there.
Yeah. I could definitely see. Well, I mean, you talked before about the Kirby-esque-ness of this at points in, I think, in issue 2. And there's a little bit of that here, I think. And also, I would say to a little bit of similarity to the, classic Ultraman, because they have gone and visited the Land of Light. And if you watch like the first time the Land of Light appears, which was in, I believe it was Ultraman Taro, it's really surreal compared to the modern renditions of it, where it just looks like basically a science fiction megalopolis. But the original versions were very surreal. Now, they weren't quite surreal like this because they were actual cities, but still, it's this otherworldly realm from which the Ultras come from.
Yeah, I do enjoy, like, this kind of gives the opposite of that, like, where you say is they're, like, kind of a utopian megapolis. This is literally ruins we're seeing here, like a barren wasteland. They even refer to it as, like, the ruins of worlds they failed, as, like, a constant reminder. So, definitely leaning into the dark reflection of Ultraman here.
Yes, for sure. But you mentioned Atom, and we were talking a little bit before we started recording about exactly how you should pronounce that, because like, is it Atom? Is it Atom? I wasn't quite sure, because the way it's spelled, I could go either way. But I did kind of wonder if it's supposed to be pronounced like Atom, because it sounds like Adam, as in Adam and Eve, because the implication seems to be almost, going back to that flashback that we had in issue 2, where we were basically seeing the first UltraMega. I did kind of sit here and wonder, is he supposed to be that UltraMega? Is he the first UltraMega?
Yeah, I was kind of the same mind, especially with some of the other biblical naming conventions we've seen here. I'm thinking it's supposed to be reminiscent of Adam.
I actually kicked myself because it didn't dawn on me that the naming this kid Noah, and he's the survivor of a flood, technically. I was like, I feel so stupid for not making that connection. But then, interestingly, there is a character in Ultraman named Ultraman Noah, which goes all the way back to the original Ultraman. There's a reference to this ancient being named Noah.
Yeah, isn't he like the first time they reference the fact there's other Ultramen out there?
Mm-hmm. But you don't see another Ultra besides Ultraman until the very, very last episode of the original. And it's within like the last 5 minutes, because then his brother Zophy shows up and says, hey, Ultraman, it's time for you to leave.
Now, one other thing I'm finding interesting here, just looking at the UltraMega's homeworld, is they show the, like, cosmic cubes of creation or something to that effect.
I know!
And we see inside that there's both, like, an UltraMega fetus and, like, a tiny little kaiju maggot of some sort. And this is kind of leaning into that whole, like, I think the kaiju are a little more sympathetic here, or the UltraMega are a little less heroic than we make them out to be.
It seems it's weirdly symbiotic, or it's almost like they're birthed in the same thing, but they're destined from birth basically to hate each other. To make another biblical comparison, it's Jacob and Esau, twins who hate each other from birth. In fact, Jacob was named Jacob. His name actually in Hebrew means usurper or liar, deceiver, because it said that because Esau was born first, and then it said that when Jacob was being born, his hand came out and literally grabbed his older brother's heel. So he was seen as this usurper, and that's exactly what happens later, because he steals his brother's birthright later.
Yeah, and, weirdly, when we see the showdown, like, the first thing we see the Kaiju Prince / Kaiju King do when he comes into contact with the UltraMega is grab his ankle and snap it. So this might be leading too much into it, especially since that kind of ties back to the first issue with him biting off the first UltraMega's foot. But yeah, I find that to be an incredibly interesting coincidence right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how when you start getting into the later portions of a story that suddenly the older parts start making a little more sense, right?
Now, yeah, and overall, I just really liked how much subtle background world building we get in this first couple page sequence, seeing this home world, and that I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the coming volumes as we see more of this intergalactic conflict, and that, yeah, apparently it's not just Earth that things didn't go well. It seems like cosmically, as a whole, the UltraMega are pretty much failing in this war.
It's interesting also, I was trying to find an example of this more directly in issue 4, but I was noticing, because we have I call him Eye Guy, not to be confused with, Eye Guy from Power Rangers. But he's basically he's what bonds with Noah to create the new UltraMega, and it's basically spelled out for us that he was also bonded with his father. as the first UltraMega in issue 1. What's interesting is that on the cover art here for the graphic novel, on the cover art here for issue 4, they're positioning this eye creature. His head is literally just a giant eye. They're positioning him on the UltraMega's chest, where on Ultraman would be his color timer. And I'm wondering if that was done intentionally.
Oh, I'm almost positive, especially with the eye kind of being involved in the transformation crystal that's very similar in appearance to the beta capsule. Yeah, I don't think that's just a coincidence by any means.
And that, which is interesting because every Ultraman has had a color timer, but they don't lean into the original show's gimmick quite as much, which is that Hayata could only be Ultraman for 3 minutes. And then when the color timer started to flash, that meant that time was running out, so it helped to create a bit of tension, even though the show still ran on TV time, which meant 3 minutes could be as long as they wanted it to be. But so I was kind of curious how they would play around with that.
Now, as far as talking about this bond between the Eye and Noah, it's much more horrific than anything we've ever seen in Ultraman.
Good Lord, I was... that was one facet of this. I was not 100... again, you hear me say this a lot. It does things that I'm not quite prepared for. And this is one of them, with just how visceral and gruesome and just everything is. And so basically both Eye Guy and Noah got their guts all spilling out. They're basically dying. He says, "We'll bond and we'll live." He even says, the Eye Guy even says, "We'll be beautiful." And then it's horrifying because it does not look pleasant, because it's basically two fleshly beings bonding together, and just it's not like light in Ultraman bonding with a human being, where it's generally just goes like that. So ugh.
Yeah. Now, one thing I'm really curious about, if they ever tie this back in, but I think a rat gets caught in the middle of this bonding sequence.
Because there's a rat munching on him.
And the rat's a recurring character, too. Like, at the end of issue 3, you even see him looking at Noah's body, and he has a little question mark coming out. So, like, he's already technically a recurring character. I'm really gonna love if there's some kind of super rat inside, or like some kind of third facet of this bond that wasn't intended. And maybe that's why this UltraMega is a little smaller or something like that. I'm really hoping this gets paid off.
I don't know, but we have to wait for issue 5 at this point to find out about all of that.
Now, as far as some of the more horrific monstrosities in this book, I feel like this is only scratching the surface when it comes to the imagery we get with the kaiju in this issue.
Hoo boy, yeah, we got some crazy. We see a kaiju mom pops out with kind of her like. I just look at this and I keep thinking of one of the 1-star letterbox reviews for Kamen Rider Zeo, which simply said, "Honestly, the monsters are hot." And I'm just like, that's Kaiju Mom. She's hot and terrifying, which the terrifying kind of cancels out the hot, but
in unsettling ways too, because like in the first issue I had pointed out that it kind of looks like she's made of intestines a little bit, and here we see her popping out of like the insides of this giant Mothra form of hers from the previous issue, and yeah, it still seems very much like she's made of the internal organs of this creature, and then pops right back in before she flies off. So
yeah, this actually makes me think a little bit of Pacific Rim. I don't know if you've seen Pacific Rim or not, but
oh, of course.
Yeah, there are definitely points in this with the kaiju where I get some Pacific Rim vibes, and this was part of it. With one creature just popping out of another like that.
And I noticed this is a little bit of a recurring theme, because one of the other kind of disgusting things in this with the kaiju is the kaiju prince. Like, finally in this issue, what was basically a sphincter of a face in the last 2 issues, he now pops out this dark black creepy skull thing just bloodily coming out of that.
Again, I was not prepared for this. I'm just reading this and then suddenly it's like, skull! I'm like, oh good Lord, what? This was one of those moments where like, this is very Hellboy. I feel like I'm just waiting for Hellboy to show up and punch this thing in its big ugly sphincter face.
And what I liked reading this, like literally the 4th time around, I'm like, oh hey, this is like a like mother like son situation. Like, she has this internal form inside her giant body, and yeah, he's got this actual face inside his sphincter face.
Yeah, and he basically gets people to cart him around like he's Jabba the Hutt. It's just
See, a lot of them do that, actually.
Yeah, well, a lot of them do. Yeah.
But I think this is going to be a common theme with a lot of the kaiju. Maybe all of them have this, because when some of them turn giant later, the one with the big horn gets a line of dialogue, he's yelling something, and we see his tongue has like a little skull face on it.
Yeah, very xenomorph-esque.
And I mean, maybe that has something to do with them being like kind of a virus that can spread, so it makes sense that they'd like be internally multiplying.
Mm-hmm. I would not be surprised if the, what's the name of the artist?
James Aaron.
James Aaron. He wrote and drew it? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I wish that would happen more often. You get more synergy between the art and the writing.
It's one of the many comparisons to manga with this particular series that I think really helps the book.
I would not be surprised if he was a fan of H.R. Giger. It's not obviously H.R. Giger, but there's definitely little facets of it, like the tongue with a face on the end of it. Or if you ever watch Zerum, which is another Keita Amemiya film, and the title character is actually named after the villain, and the villain in that looks like this big hulking thing with a conical hat, and there's a tiny face on the hat, and it will fly out and on a giant tentacle and try to bite people.
Oh, hey, we kind of get something like that in this book.
Yep. So Amemiya is probably also, I don't know how he's not seen Amemiya. There's so many things like, how do you just magically tap into all the right things without knowing about it? I'm just so confused about it.
And I mean, by issue 4, he'd had a few months of writing a toku book, so I wouldn't be surprised if by issue 4, maybe even by the time issue 1 hit publication, that he had maybe seen that or some other more Amemiya films. But this sheer level of unexpected and rather intense gore really carries through to a lot of the fight scenes, which is definitely in contrast with the way Ultraman usually operates, since Ultraman's very judo-based in its fighting, just a lot of throws and wrestling with these people in monster costumes.
The Showa shows will actually get pretty gory. I'm not kidding you. Starting with Ultra 7, the way he would finish the monsters off is he would literally decapitate them. There's even an episode of Ultra 7 where his crest on his helmet he can actually take it off and use it like a blade. And no kidding, there's actually one where he's fighting the monster of the week and he basically cuts the thing's carotid artery and it sprays blood all over him. It's just that the monster's blood is green, so it doesn't look as bad.
These are the Ultra series that I'm most interested in looking in, since I love these older, darker Showa toku shows, so very excited to see
Return of Ultraman, they started cranking up more of the decapitations. Ultraman Ace, basically every episode ends with a decapitation. There's even an episode of Ace where no joke, he uses an energy attack that slices the monster in half up and down, and as it splits open, you see all of the innards just pour out as the two halves just fall over. It's nuts.
Now that's funny, because while this is so much more extreme in so many other aspects, he does that same move to one of the monsters just in passing. The UltraMega releases a mouth beam that chops one of them in half, and it's not that bloody. If anything, it's the least intense kill in the entire issue.
Yeah, basically. I'm flipping through looking for all of these. Mm-hmm, yeah. Yep. Yeah, I see it right here. Yep. Splits it. But this one was nice. It actually cauterized. No, that monster in Ace. No cauterization, just goes whoop. It's basically an energy knife, just goes right through him and then just all just spills right out.
The UltraMega fight is just so intense in this with its gore, and I don't feel like I've ever really seen that with a superhero's first fight, unless it's a book where they're intentionally going to kill this hero by the end of it, issue 1. But yeah, he gets stabbed in the eye with a venom stinger and is visibly poisoned and burning.
I know, that was really intense when I saw that. I was just he's gonna get poisoned and half his face is gonna swell, and it's definitely influenced by Ultraman, but the eyes he has actually remind me more of Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, he's definitely got that same eye pattern.
That's for sure. And then he ends the whole thing with his hand cannon.
Yeah, for those that didn't read the book, literally launches his hand like a cannon, and not in the kind of cool robot way where he's getting it back. No, he very much does not get it back, confirmed.
His forearm does look suspiciously in this one panel, looks suspiciously like like a Mega Man style arm cannon.
Wouldn't be surprised if they develop something like that later. They got Beth working with them. They can make something nice. But yeah, I swear the gore just takes you by surprise in this, even after all of the brutal kills we've seen beforehand, because the fight starts very confidently for Noah. Like, you see he's got this super speed, he just rushes up and kills the biggest one of these guys with a single shot, and then, like, right as he's getting going, he gets kind of wrecked by two of them teaming up. Like, yeah, gets stabbed in the eye, loses a hand later, gets his ankle broken, so it doesn't set you up for thinking this hero isn't gonna do well here.
Yeah. This actually reminds me a lot of Ultraman Nexus, because Ultraman Nexus is powerful, but he does not have the easiest times dealing with the monsters, because the monsters he's dealing with are just that nasty.
And, I mean, the episode I watched today, like, he's dealing with the, like, Nega Ultraman, or, like, an evil version, and then a monster that's possessing a child is also there. I'm like, this guy's got too much to deal with, dang.
Yeah, because the monster absorbed the little girl. Like, if you've ever seen Gamera 3, that's what we're talking about. Like, it's inside of this monster's innards, and they actually show the little girl in there getting pressed upon by all of the innards and everything. It's horrifying. And Nexus is like, how do I deal with this? I need to save the little girl, but I have to kill the monster. I don't know. And then there's, the one of the Dark Ultras. That's not really what they are, but poor Nexus has too many problems to deal with.
Now, I did want to touch on the end of this fight a little bit, because I hate to say it, but I think this is one of the weaker moments of the story so far, is that the fight between the UltraMega and the Kaiju Prince / Kaiju King is only about 4 or 5 pages, and I don't think quite gets the room it needs to really develop itself. So, like, we see Noah getting his butt kicked, and then next thing you know, he pulls out a finishing move that manages to work, and then 2 pages later, the book's over.
Yeah, it does end very quickly.
And I mean, it is a bit of a full circle moment, because, like, the book sets itself up in 4 or 5 pages in issue 1, so, like, I guess it's a little poetic that it ends just as quickly in the final issue, but yeah, I really would have liked to see, like, more of a quiet moment between Noah and Beth afterwards, or, yeah, just a little more processing of the fact that Noah just killed the leader of the Kaiju.
In a truly Mortal Kombat fashion? Seriously.
And, I mean, there's also a little bit of the waste of the giant robot that's in the mix here.
Yeah.
Like, it is great in how it contributes to the book. Like, there's a great kind of slapstick comedy with it, to a point. Like, the Kaiju Prince obviously doesn't know how to drive it. He's being very pathetic as he goes, and he's like, look at me now, Mom! He's all mad that the mom he's not ready for war.
He is such a mama's boy. It's to the point of almost being disgusting.
Yeah, and it's just always been that way, even from the beginning of, like, him being small. Like, me be big again?
What is it? I must be immense. I must be immense. All of that. It is actually weirdly funny to see basically a kaiju get, literally taken down to size. And he's like, I want to be big again. Why am I not big anymore?
And that's one thing I'm noticing about the difference between the UltraMega and the Kaiju here, is just, like, the outlook on the world put on both of them. Like, the Kaiju are very focused on, like, being as big and powerful as possible, and that's all that matters, whereas the UltraMega seem very nihilistic. Like, when he's about to turn, he's even telling him, like, you're gonna die under the tooth and claw of the enemy. Like, you'll choke on your own blood. Your innards will drag like flags, and still you will fight. It's a very different outlook from two things that share the same birthing cube here, and I really am interested in how we see this play out, and, like, this mentality between the two get developed in the next arc.
Well, the funny thing is I could almost argue that they're both kind of pointless pursuits. One is this constant accruing of power, and then the other one is just like, what's the point of all of this? There is no point. Yeah.
You're gonna die fighting. Do it anyway.
So they basically arrive at the same conclusion, just by different roads. Because the UltraMegas are already powerful, so they're probably coming at it from the perspective of, we have power. It's not all that interesting. There's no fulfillment there. Have fun pursuing it.
I almost guarantee the pointlessness of this duality is going to be... It's going to be explored a lot, especially with how this issue ends. Just, Jason being like, you didn't bond with it, did you?
I will tell you, reading the first issue, the way it ended, like, oh, I thought we were going to be following these characters. Even the back cover copy of the graphic novel makes it sound like we're going to keep following these characters. We're not. And then the dad comes back as basically a severed head. Like, oh, okay, we are bringing those characters back. And then it just ends with him with this horrified look on his face, and says, "You didn't bond with it, did you?" And then the last panel is just Noah with a black eye, beat up, and he's just staring.
And you can tell, like, he's got to be aware of how much worse the world is because of the UltraMega. Like, the whole idea we're introduced to that the kaiju only change and they only grow big, and the presence of an UltraMega just kind of shows that, like, they're not contributing anything to the planet. Like, the UltraMega are the worst thing that ever happened here. Like, as bad as the world is in its current state, it was better off with the UltraMega gone. Like, most people didn't even know whether or not the kaiju existed. And now that Noah is an UltraMega, the kaiju can be big again, and this war is gonna take off and probably kill a lot more innocent people all over again.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's definitely making matters complicated by comparison to, say, an Ultraman series, where it's more black and white, because the UltraMega realize that the kaiju are a problem. They are a serious problem. So I feel like, and this could just be my personal interpretation, I may get proven wrong later, and feel free to disagree with me, Grant, but I feel like the Ultra-Mega have good intentions. It's just their very presence, whether they want to admit it or not, makes the problem worse.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on the money there, and, like, we definitely get hints at it with Jason's origin, and, like, the fact that he turned his wife into the kaiju queen just by being around her. Yep,
yeah, it's kind of like the Batman problem, Does Batman, whether intentionally or not, does he create the villains that he fights? Because the argument has been made in some Batman stories that some of these supervillains wouldn't exist without Batman. It's almost like these villains have to rise up to meet the challenge of Batman.
Yeah, and I do really like when superhero stories explore that, and I think it's well past time the tokusatsu genre gets that treatment.
Mm-hmm. I think I'd have to dig around with it a little bit more, but I'm sure you can find it someplace. But it is cool to see this comic playing around. It plays around with a lot of ideas. That's the thing. I'm sure it's kind of like, to go back to Hokkaido. Like, if you watch the trailers and such for Hokkaido, you would think that it's just going to be basically ultra-violent live-action anime that exists just to be edgy and violent. That's all it is. But then you actually watch the movie, and there's actually a lot more symbolism and substance to it. And I think some people might look at UltraMega and they won't be able to get past the violence, the gruesomeness of it. But it's playing around. I mean, you were pointing it out. This is actually really good sequential art storytelling. It's great world building. Yeah, it's ultra violent, to pardon the pun. I'm not hitting the button for that one. But there's some really interesting things at play in this. It's more than just gruesome violence, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I mean, especially with independent comics, even origin 90s Image comics, you will see violence for violence's sake, and that's not what this is here.
This doesn't... I think there might be a few points where it feels a little gratuitous, but generally speaking, I don't feel like it's gratuitous. I mean, even stuff like, I just flipped it open and I came to the poisoning scene. The whole point of that is to show just how vulnerable, as powerful as Noah is, it's also showing just how vulnerable he is too.
Now, as far as things this book's playing with, in issue 1, I had kind of wondered at whether or not the main character's name of Jason might be a Power Rangers reference at all. Coming back around on issue 4 here and how it ends, and him coming back as a giant head, I feel like they've got to be going for a Zordon reference with Power Rangers here, and I would bet money that we see this head in a tube or at least a big old preservation jar at some point in the next arc. So now I'm feeling a little more confident in the Power Rangers ties here.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that for sure. I also wondered if maybe the naming him Jason was also a bit of a reference to the classics with Jason and the Argonauts, because Jason is a mythic hero, and that's kind of what he is in issue 1. He is, especially once you get to this Mad Max post-apocalyptic world here, he's in some ways a mythic hero. No one really knows that because you've got people who are trying to dress up like the UltraMega, but no one has seen the UltraMega for years.
Yeah, and I mean, that is kind of a through line with his life, too, because we see even before he was an UltraMega, he was kind of a disgraced boxer. So, yeah, kind of this, like, legendary warrior thing is something that's carried with him before he was a superhero.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's a reluctant hero as well. So he's like, well, I'm the UltraMega, not a job I wanted. I feel like Noah wants that job, but I don't think he quite realizes what that job is going to entail. I mean, he's already gotten a taste of it because the bonding was not fun, and fighting the monsters also not fun.
Yeah, I think if there's a through line to his story here, it's him not understanding the consequences of these fights. Like, issue 2, he uses a robot to do his little Kamen Rider adventures, and it winds up getting his home destroyed and his best friend kidnapped. Issue 3, he almost dies in issue 3. Like, he is on the brink of death when that issue ends, and turns him into an Ultramega. Issue 4, he ends with losing a hand and being permanently scarred and just looks all wonky and deformed at the end of the issue.
Which is something that some Ultra series have played around with, where if the Ultraman gets injured in a fight, the injury will actually carry over when he returns to his human form for the host. So sometimes the injuries do carry over. So I'm curious how permanent this injury is. Is his hand going to slowly grow back, kind of like in Deadpool 2? Have like a really tiny hand after about after a week or something like that. It hasn't quite come back.
I'm pretty confident it's permanent for 2 reasons. One, in issue 1, we see Steven or Stefan, that he lost an arm during his fights and it didn't come back. He's still missing the arm as an adult. And I think it was the letters column of issue 2 or 3 that James Herron even confirms that these guys don't regrow their limbs when they turn into UltraMega. So I don't think he's getting his hand back anytime soon.
Well, that's a bold move to make such a massive maiming, I guess you could say, on your main character this early.
Well, when you've got this mecha engineer of a main side character, I'm sure they'll find some kind of workaround. Like, he'll probably get some kind of Luke Skywalker fist or something,
and that'll grow big with him, so he'll have like a big robot hand.
Or alternatively, maybe he'll get nothing, and this is just James Herron's nod to Robert Kirkman, since this isn't just made by Image, it's also made by Skybound, Robert Kirkman's imprint of Image. So, get the Rick Grimes thing of a hero missing his hand halfway through the series.
Yeah, I am really curious to see where this is going to go. With Jason kind of being the Zordon figure, I could see him perhaps being a reluctant mentor, you might say, because it sounds like he wouldn't have preferred that his son try to take up this mantle. He seems a little bit worried because that's what he says. Like, you didn't bond with it, did you? And but then he probably is going to find out, well, you did. Let me help you out, son.
The one person who knows what you're going through.
Yep. And then we can get a kind of a weird father-son dynamic going on there, which I think would be interesting.
Before we wrap things up here on our key points, is there anything else we want to touch on before I get to the question of the week?
Well, going off of what I just said about father-son, I just realized, well, although the Kaiju Prince is dead now, so I was going to say we might have been able to kind of continue this whole, child and parent dynamics on both sides with our heroes and our villains, but now the Kaiju Prince is dead, so that's not really a thing. Unless the Kaiju Queen has another kid, which would be interesting.
And actually, I am kind of surprised with that the Kaiju Prince is already dead, and we never really got a chance to explore the fact that, like, Noah and the Kaiju Prince are technically half brothers, and one of them's dead before either of them even realizes that.
Well, maybe she'll have another child, because at this point, the only main villain we have is the Kaiju Queen. And it seemed like, at least in these 4 issues, she was grooming her son to be something important, and she's always disappointed that he's not. Weirdly enough, that does actually, now that I think about it, remind me a bit of Power Rangers, because they have dynamics like that in Power Rangers.
Elaborate on that a bit.
Well, like in Mighty Morphin, especially in like season 3, if you listen to the Power Trip, we talk about this, about, there's a lot of family dynamics going on there, especially when Rita's father shows up, Master Vile, and and her brother, Rito, shows up, and he's kind of disappointed with both of them. and Rita's husband, Lord Zed, because he's just like, you can't do anything right either. So
now, what I do want to ask a much more knowledgeable Toku fan while I've got them, and this has been a bit of a recurring question, but if there's one piece of tokusatsu content out there that you would recommend specifically for fans of this book, what would you point them toward?
Well, basically the same thing that I've been talking about throughout this, and that would be Ultraman The Next and Nexus. Out of any Ultraman show that I've seen, and I admit I haven't seen all of them yet, that movie and that series feel the most like UltraMega. With how dark everything is, with the seriousness of it, the gravity, the more adult-oriented tone and themes, dealing with PTSD and grief and lost love. And the big difference is I'm not getting it quite as much in UltraMega, but that kind of hope in the midst of despair, because there's always at least a smidgen of it. But there's also a lot of episodes where they don't end happily. They don't end happily at all. And poor Nexus is always getting his butt kicked. And it feels like every time he wins, as powerful as he is, it's very, very earned. Like he's always just a little out of his league at all points. And like I said, we've talked about things like, there's one episode where they have to kill a child. And, it's not a very pleasant experience for anybody involved and things like that. And the monsters are horrific. Absolutely horrific. You got one that looks like a Cerberus, but like the other 2 heads are like another head split in half, and one looks like a rat monster. One I think is supposed to be insectoid, and well, we can say this on this podcast. I think I kind of like to call it vagina face. So
yeah, get it out here while you can.
Yeah, basically. So yeah, so. Like I said, you can watch it on YouTube with fan subs, but Mill Creek is going to release it, I think, hopefully in the next year or so. They haven't made an official announcement, but given what they have announced that they're releasing, they're getting very close to when they will probably do it.
Now, before we go here, where can our listeners find you outside of this podcast, of course?
Well, I have been joking for a little while. I feel like I'm running a podcast empire now because... As of 2022, I have 3 podcasts, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. So my flagship show is The Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu, and that's exactly how I talk on that show. It's a film appreciation and audio drama. As weird as that sounds, I make it work. There's a whole to do about how that came about, because it was not necessarily intended to be that way, but it has evolved over the 2.5 years that it has been on. So, as I mentioned, I am a master's graduate, so I actually approach things, like UltraMega, like Ultraman, Kaiju, and all of these things from an academic standpoint, and I bring my academic prowess to all of this. But I promise you, it is actually entertaining. I am definitely not a dry professor. So anybody who's having flashbacks to the most boring professors they had in college, I assure you the show is not like that. And I always make sure to have very entertaining guests on. I have a rotating roster because I don't have a regular co-host, but I have a pool of people that I'm always bringing in to talk about interesting things. I've had some of them are friends of mine who are podcasters or fellow writers, because I'm a creative writer as well. I've got novels and such published. or I bring in other podcasters. I've had some really high-profile guests. Like I've had Ryan Collins, the Omniviewer. I had the host of Up From the Depths was on. I've had Kaiju Kim on. Those are some names that your listeners might be familiar with.
Yeah, I'd say anyone that's actively following the kaiju podcasting scene should hopefully have recognized at least one or two of those.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, that's one of them. And then I've mentioned Henshin Men, which it was how you found us. I've explained Henshin Men a bit already, but you should definitely check that out. We're making our way through Kamen Rider. Like I said, there's a few filler episodes that we've done. We did a crossover with the Power Trip, which was kind of funny because it's a crossover between two shows with three people because I'm on both of them. So, but it was for the 3-part episode of Mighty Morphin that introduced Masked Rider, so it only made sense.
Yeah, and I mean, for the listeners of this show, like I gave a very beginner's introduction to Kamen Rider in one of my first episodes, so for those that want to know more about the character but don't want to dedicate the time to watching a 70s Monster of the Week show, I've really enjoyed the Henshin Men as a way to take that in without too much time.
Although some episodes of the show you should watch because of just the sheer insanity of it. At this point, one of me and Travis's favorite episodes, not only mostly for the podcast, is I can't remember which episode it was of Kamen Rider. I think it was in the 20s someplace, but the monster of the week was a flying squirrel. That monster was nuts.
Oh, nice pun. Where's your soundboard? There we go.
Now I get it. Yeah. Sorry, I deserve that one. I deserve that one. That's the second time I have unintentionally made that joke.
Lord.
But yeah, Musasabito makes no sense whatsoever. It's just, wow. You just watch the episode, you'll understand. And then listen to our corresponding episode for it. And then, obviously, The Power Trip, a journey through the Power Rangers franchise, hosted by Michael Hamilton and myself. We're going through the entire Power Rangers franchise one season at a time. So it uses the same format as Henshin Men, but instead of doing it by episode, it's season by season. So we're talking about each season in broad strokes. We're going to talk about the characters, the villains, the Zords, all the cool stuff. And then we're going to get into some very involved, usually thematic discussions, because we're noticing some things, how there are ideas that keep getting played around with in a different season of this show. Our most recent recording was for Power Rangers in Space, which is one of my personal favorites. And the joke ever since then has been that I basically gave a 3-hour PowerPoint presentation on astronomers' wigs and their symbolism. So
all right, so truly deep dives, I take it. Yeah, I will need to check out more of the Power Trip then.
Yes, and that one actually just launched in January. Actually, as of this recording, we are about to release our 5th regular episode. We have a couple of bonus episodes. So we got our 5th episode coming up, which will be over Power Rangers Zeo.
Ooh, my personal favorite there.
Ooh, well then, you're going to have a good time.
My nerd self just finished collecting the Lightning Collection series of Zeo figures, including the 2018 San Diego Comic-Con exclusive double pack of the Red Mighty Morphin and Gold Zeo Ranger.
I'm a little jealous.
Yeah, kind of my prized possession right there among my limited action figures.
Did you have to shoot your hand off like Noah to get it?
A little bit. Thankfully, it was right after Christmas. My local comic shop got it in. I think someone just did a consignment deal with them, and I had just gotten a Christmas bonus, so nice chunk of that went toward the couple action figures, and I have no regrets.
You lucky, lucky punk. When Michael hears this, he's probably going to be shaking his fist at his phone and yelling at you for having that.
Now, speaking of Michael, though, and also your other work, where can we find the Kaiju Ramen magazine that's being released?
KaijuRamenMedia.com. Like I said, as of this recording, issue 5 is about to come out, and it's themed around Henshin heroes. I have an article in there on Keita Amemiya. Michael is also going to be starting an article companion series that will be going for the entire year for Kaiju Ramen, which publishes 4 issues a year, so it's quarterly. And it's called The Power Trip, My Journey through the Power Rangers franchise because he rediscovered his love of Power Rangers actually at the height of quarantine. He just started watching it on Netflix and then it all disappeared 5 minutes later. So he started watching it again and fell in love with it once more as an adult. So he's going to be talking about that. And I did a lot of editing on that article for him because I do editing work for Kaiju Ramen, and he's really zeroing in on the thematic elements of each season to give those articles a little bit more of a focus. If you want to really deep dive, like if you ever see the meme of the iceberg and like you see like the top and how there's hardly anything there and underneath there's a whole bunch. So it's like the top is the article and underneath is the podcast. But Kaiju Ramen is fantastic. I helped kickstart it when it launched just over a year ago. They just finished their second successful Kickstarter to do a special hardbound 1-volume edition of the first year of the magazine, and I was involved in one form or another with basically every issue. And I have an article in 3 out of those 4, so I can't say enough about that. And both Henshin Men and The Power Trip are part of their podcast network, along with Kaiju Weekly. So if you want some good Toku and Kaiju podcasts, look no further than the Kaiju Ramen Podcasting Network.
All right. Well, I will definitely be looking more into that myself, as I already have been, and I do hope our listeners get a chance to check out the Kaiju Ramen network and magazine.
Yes, and I would be remiss, I'll say one more thing. As I mentioned, I'm also a writer. So if you want to check out my writing, some of which is Kaiju related, you can check out nathanjsmarchand.com. That is my author website. And yes, I had to use not one, but both of my middle initials, because I found out when I made the website that the domain nathanmarchand.com was already taken. I'm going to find that guy, and I'm going to feed him to the Kaiju Prince. Got a little dark there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. You got to self-promote, and you got to self-promote aggressively. No
What are you talking about? Shameless self-promotion is practically one of my spiritual gifts. That and ranting. I've joked that if I was a Power Rangers monster, that my name would be Rant Master. So I would just talk the Power Rangers to death.
But before we talk our listeners to death, I think I will bring our episode to a close here. I'd like to thank you again, Nathan, for coming on and joining. This has been a lot of fun, and I've definitely learned a lot through having you on here.
I would love to be on again, and hopefully next time I can bring at least one of my co-hosts with me. I'll try to make that happen.
All right, we will certainly try for that come next season of UltraMega. But while we're still ways away from the next issue of UltraMega, there's plenty of great tokusatsu content I'd love to cover in the meantime. If you listeners have any recommendations of your own, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Giant Size Violence Facebook page, on Twitter as @UltraMegaCast, or email us at giantsizeviolence@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance, and give a special shout out to artists Ray Day Parade and Dark Moon Home Video for designing our logo and cover photos. Our intro and outro music is You're an Ace Kid by Demon Dice from their album Alcatraz. You can check out the new EP, Shut Up, Get Happy, on iTunes and Spotify. We hope you join us again as we continue to explore the movies and shows this comic draws influence from. Until then, take care and remember to do your part in preventing the spread of the Kaiju virus.
Cue credits! Oh wait, wrong show.
Can't be seen by downcast eyes. So raise your gaze up till your 10 feet tall and shake your fist to the sky. Refuse to higher, let them make you small. Cause they love just to see you convinced you're just a brick in the wall. But you're not just a brick in the wall. La da 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 da.